All right, happy Monday, everyone. It is halfway through April, which is crazy to me. This month has flown by, and
Don't remind me.
yeah, I know. And this is the community meeting for Gateway API for April 15th. As a general reminder, this is a Kubernetes community meeting, so we follow that code of conduct. Just please be nice to each other. We have never had any issues, but one thing that we encourage, I think there's a very small group here, so I can imagine anyone who wants to say something should feel very welcome to. But if you have any concerns, don't hesitate to use Zoom's raise hand feature or drop something in chat so we make sure we get to you. Uh,
If
yeah.
you don't say anything, then it's just going to be me and Rob heckling each other back and forth for the whole meeting. So,
I mean, that's always fun too. So, yeah. So yeah, I mean, this is absolutely a meeting that I am trying to, connect the final few dots to get 1.1, well, an RC out for 1.1. So first up, there's just this every release I make some kind of, or someone makes some kind of brief presentation like this that we take to the SIGNet leads, basically just to give the high level overview of what we're actually trying to release in this thing. And there's actually a fair amount that is fitting into 1.1. For those
has
of you
that
that may have missed it,
has
gRPC
that been
route.
scheduled yet?
I we'll get there. Working
Okay.
on it. Yeah. So gRPC route 1 is going to GA. Gamma is going to GA. Congrats.
Woo.
As long as Flynn gets a conformance report in. No pressure. And
Yeah, no pressure.
and then port and parent ref, this tiny thing but particularly useful for mesh. And then conformance profiles, huge thanks to Mattia and Shane for enabling this. And actually for Christine for actually displaying that, which that'll come up soon. Um, then there's a bunch of other stuff that is coming into experimental TLS terminology, client cert verification, session persistence. That's been a long running one. Thank you, Grant and Gina, for those. And gateway params that just kind of snuck in. And apparently I didn't update my examples, so that's embarrassing. I know I had, well, whatever. We'll get,
Has
oh, yeah, I switched them up. I have the example.
uh,
Well, whatever. I'll fix that later. So
is
yes,
there
anyways, that's the thing. But that's what's actually fitting into Gateway 1.1 if we can finally get it out the door. Related to that, we have a changelog PR where I pinged a lot of people, basically everyone who I consider responsible for these major features, to please kind of fill out your area of the changelog so that we can accurately represent what's changing or what's new in your specific feature. Um, yeah, so that's that for that. I think I've gotten a couple responses so far, but more are very, very welcome. Okay, so with that, we have basically everything that's going to GA is on track or complete. The only thing left on Gamma is this little thing from Mike Beaumont, which Flynn, since you seem to be the only Gamma lead here right now, I'm going to defer exclusively to you. Um, I
again,
hope
no
that's
pressure.
okay. Uh,
I'll just
but
heckle from the sidelines.
oh, Mike. Oh, good. I'm glad you're here, Mike.
I think you're right. I'm
Yes.
officially no longer a Gamma lead, but so I'll just heckle.
Well, but I mean, in
I thought
practice,
this was I actually thought this was long since done. Um,
I think we revised
I
it
think
and we
we
all approved it, and we just never got an LTTM on it.
okay, because this is looking very familiar to me. Um, I think I am going to put an LGTM on this one and call it good. Let
I think
me,
that's correct. Like there's so many approves and like even an LGTM that isn't quite an LGTM because I think everyone's afraid to be the person to merge it, but I think this is us saying yes, we should just merge it.
I'm just
Um,
I'm just rereading it one more time and then I will own the final LGTM.
I think it's basically
Sweet.
just clarifying like the prior concerns about service that the Signet API reviewers had, and clarifying that like this is maybe not the final end determination state, but we have the flexibility, and if and when you make a better solution, we would be happy to adopt that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Frank added something on February 8th that is arguably an improvement about adding a service alternative. I cannot commit that one, but Rob, if you care to do that, please go ahead.
Well, I guess I can.
Yeah.
Sure, let's do that. Superpowers
You
at play
can you
here.
can you can put a comment on there that says Flynn said this was okay if you like. I mean,
All right, so that is good. That would wipe any LGTM, but I think it's good now. Yeah. So,
all right.
Flynn, if you're all
So
right with the final LGTM, I think we're good. Cool, teamwork. Thank you to Flynn and Mike and others. Cool.
all right.
All
So
right.
I love the way
The
Crow
next one
assigns.
here is
Anyway.
basically everything coming into experimental, or just that's new in general. That's the TLS terminology, the infra params. Those are both complete. And then there's this mess of everything related to policy, which I decided to throw a wrench in last minute because, well, no, I mean this is everyone at KubeCon decided to throw a wrench in this, and I am helping throw that wrench in. So whatever.
Accurate.
But I think one of the things at KubeCon that was pretty clear is that there's broad support for policy target refs being plural. And also something that I think was purely accidental is that policy target ref should be namespace local by default and only not if you have mesh use cases for some other strange thing. So like we can do non-namespace local things, but yeah, it doesn't make sense for backend TLS policy. So this clarifies both of those things. I think there's pretty good approval in LGTMs here. I do want to just call out, I don't know if Candace is on this call. I don't see her.
I'm here.
But, oh, you are. Oh, great. Thank you.
Awesome.
So Candace, you had a good question about where this belonged. Like, because we're making the breaking change to backend TLS policy, and because of that, we're bumping it from V1 Alpha 2 to V1 Alpha 3. And this is kind of a breaking change. It basically there to clarify what it does, it adds a new type that is local policy target reference and then a
Change,
namespace policy target.
changes the name, right? Not
Yeah.
adds a new type, but changes the name of an old type.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. That's correct. And for better or for worse, Kubernetes in general has had this pattern that breaking Go types are not like breaking API changes. Like if we just mess with the implementers, that's like not a big deal as long as we don't mess with the users. I don't
Yeah,
know
but
I know that's very popular with Flynn. So
well, but also
but go
if
ahead.
we're changing the name, how do I phrase this one? If we're changing the name of a field in a CR that people will be using as opposed to we're changing a type that implementers will write to, that feels like a breaking change that will affect
Yeah.
users, and that should be a protocol bump. Leaving aside lots and lots of discussion about the lying ways the API server lies to people, but still, yeah.
Yeah, and this is not this specific change is not a user-facing change. Candace has a separate PR that will make a user-facing change, but this is just a changing the name of a Go struct change, basically, and adding another
Changing the
one that
name of
does.
a type rather than changing the name of a key in a serialization. Right?
Correct.
Yeah, I don't care about that.
Okay.
I care a lot less about that, more accurately.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear. And that's one of the things that this, I don't think I want to include it in the scope of this PR, but it did make me think a little bit about maybe instead of having this like policy types.go, we should move it somewhere outside of API versioning, because it's not like the types in this file are not really part of a CR. Like they're imported by backend TLS policy and soon backend LB policy, but they're not versioned themselves in the same way as any other CRD. So I mean, they're close to shared types too. And I think Mike, you called this one out as this is kind of like a shared type, which maybe that's okay. I don't think I really want to move them in the context of this specific PR, if that's okay, but I am very open to moving them in any kind of follow-up. I just don't, my biggest goal with this one is to unblock the changes to backend TLS policy and backend LB policy, because those PRs are both sitting there waiting for this to merge.
I think
Which
I
one
tend to
is-
agree with these more as shared types for the future, but I would also tend to agree that there's no point in holding this one for that move.
Oh,
Sorry, go ahead, Candace.
okay, hold on one second. Sorry. My audio is garbage sometimes. And I heard
Now I can't hear you.
am I flaking?
You are flaking.
Okay, sorry. Yes, so I think I agree with what you're saying, that shared types is probably the best fit. If I heard you correctly.
Yeah. I agree with you that blocking this PR on moving the type definitions seems silly.
Cool.
Yeah, well, let's not do that.
Yeah. And I think I also stepped on Candace. Candace, what were you going to say?
Yeah, it's just a bit of understanding, a lack of understanding on my part, as to, so we're making some changes to backend TLS policy that requires that, requires, suggests that we completely remove the V1 Alpha 2 version of it and replace it with a V1 Alpha 3 version of it, which I think is going to break the few people who have implementations already, Contour being one of them.
I agree that that will break them. And I am in support of requiring that breakage. Not too long ago, working with Linkerd, I went through exactly this sort of thing for a new CRD that we were implementing without having the type that was no longer supported be removed. And it was exceptionally painful from the perspective of somebody who was trying to get anything done. The nice thing about removing V1 Alpha 2 is that the API server will prevent you from doing it by accident. So you have to be very intentional about asking for that breakage. And presumably that will require you to be intentional about being ready for it before you are intentional about asking for the breakage. And overall, I'm personally a really big fan of that sort of intentional breakage rather than allowing things to be accidentally broken.
Yeah, and so my question is still about why we would do that for backend TLS policy and not for policy at this stage.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think that the difference here is that these are internal types that other, implementations controllers may use, but they're not user-facing CRDs. Like the real pain point that we're talking about here is users or controllers not having a path to support one or the other, right? That it's a really breaking change. Somebody updates to the latest version of Gateway CRDs, things break for them, controller breaks, whatever. These kind of type changes are indifferent, right? A controller could update to use these newer types, and the same APIs, the same everything would still work for them. It's not actually it's a name change, but it's not actually a breaking change from a controller or user perspective.
Now, Rob, you mentioned there was another CRD that comment that maybe that we may go a very different direction with, right? Sorry, another PR.
Yeah, yeah, because backend LB policy has not been added to the API at all yet. So this is just trying to get ahead of it and make sure that we just do it right from the outset, or as right as we can from the outset. Not that backend TLS policy was not done correctly. It was done correctly. We just have learned more about policy thanks to backend TLS policy, and have, I think, come to some improvements that I think will be helpful.
It was done correctly, but we've changed what correctly means.
Yes. Yeah.
It's always hard going first.
Yeah, that's for
Well,
sure.
yeah.
We have learned a lot of good feedback. Glenn, I think I have to call out you for pointing out all the pain points around policy, and I think we're taking a lot of action. I don't know if it's enough action, but we really are trying to listen to those pain points, and
The
hopefully
biggest
we get to a better spot.
the biggest thing that I've been hearing recently that makes me feel a lot better about policy is that it feels like people are coming around to the idea that policy should be limited to use with types that we don't control. And that makes me feel enormously better about policy. On that topic, actually, a thing that came up in some other discussion, and I don't remember the context anymore. Has there been any discussion in the past of adding parameters refs to gateways and other types other than gateway classes? I think that
We
may have
did it.
come up in, say again?
We did it. It's one of the things that we zombied up and got merged in for 1.1.
Well, crap. I'm just like not paying attention to things. Sorry. Wow, it's awesome when people read my mind and do what man, that is great. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
That was,
Pardon me, I have
was
to
it
go
the,
and like hide my face for a little while now because
it would be very easy to miss that one. That is for sure.
there we
So,
go. Nice.
no, this is the wrong link. I don't know where it is. Oh yeah, I changed
One of these
half the
gaps.
wrong slides. But John, so in the last week or 2 weeks ago, we had a meeting where somebody raised a very good limitation of gateway class params, and everyone was like, "Man, we should really just like let that be gateway level." And there was already a gap that was already approved that did that, and we pulled it out at the last minute for the last release, and we said, "Okay, we should really include it in this one." And so,
Okay.
yeah, came back.
I may have missed that as well because it's in infrastructure and not top level. That's
Yep.
my story and I'm sticking to it.
So yeah,
But
no, I
more
think that's
seriously,
a big,
yeah, more seriously, that I think will be a big help because that gives a path for implementations to very deliberately extend gateways without having, because we had filters for HTTP routes, we had stuff for the gateway class, we didn't have anything good where we could say, hey, I need to associate something with this specific gateway. And
yeah,
that should really help with that.
yeah,
Cool.
agree. Cool. All right, well, while we're still on this topic, if I can get another LGTM, there are plenty of LGTMs, but maybe actually no, there are plenty of approves, not plenty of LGTMs. So maybe one more LGTM on this one would be good, and then we can unblock the follow-up PRs, one by Candace for backend TLS policy, and one by Grant for session persistence. So the session persistence one, or go ahead.
In 2966, I see changes to type names. I see a removal of the thing saying that you're limited to one target ref. Oh, I see some documentation stuff. Am I missing anything or is that it?
Yeah, no, so I can give a real quick summary. So basically what this does is it replaces policy target reference with local and namespace policy target reference. So you can't, accidentally add a namespace policy target reference when you didn't really want one. You either have to choose local or namespaced, because I think we have seen some accidental usage of the like namespace reference, which is not something we want to encourage. And then the other thing is this basically just says, hey, if you do have multiple target references, here's how it works. Candace had a very good point, which others agreed with, which was that instead of my original solution of accept both target ref and target refs and merge them together, which was overly complicated, we could just add some validation to just say you can only set one at a time. And if you need to migrate, you unset one and set the other at the same time, and you're good. So that's, I think, the scope of this one.
All right, I'm going to LGTM this one.
You're the best. Thank you. Yeah, so with that, the Grant's PR is awfully close on session persistence. We just need to do those couple little updates based on, once that PR merges. I don't know if it's Grant on this call. Yes, you are.
Grant
Is there
is.
anything you want to cover or call out on this one?
I wouldn't say anything in particular, but I think my one hesitation is that I don't feel like I've gotten many comments on the API itself. I think I've gotten a lot of comments on the gap and the surrounding verbiage, like the surrounding documentation. But so I would say I would be surprised if I got everything right in this sort of first round, because I'm not an API designer by any means. So it's sort of I guess my hesitation is I don't feel like I've gotten a whole lot of feedback to say it looks good or it looks bad. So I'm guessing it looks good, but it would be worth, I guess, getting some more eyes on it.
Did you and my apologies if you've already answered this someplace else. Did you look at what multiple implementations are capable of doing for session persistence as you were going through the API?
Yeah, definitely. And that's how I sort of distilled this API that we have from a bit of a kind of a bisection from a lot of those. But obviously we're not including everything, like the anything that implementations can do currently. It's kind of I think honestly the mechanism I used was when it came up, when someone said, hey, you're going to need this, and it looked like implementations had, like most implementations had that API. That's what I added. That's when I added
Yeah.
it. So it's not super what's the word, scientific, but that was sort of my mechanisms to adding APIs.
Most of the reason I asked was that while I was reading over it and then looking over it again just now, it looked definitely like there are things that you were putting in were things that Envoy could do, but I am not terribly familiar with things other than Envoy. So I wanted to make sure that you checked into that. Looks pretty straightforward. It looks like a reasonable subset.
Yeah, I really want to call out Grant's work here. He in the start of session persistence, which was a while ago, he had one of the most exhaustive overviews of all other vendors and what they offer for session persistence APIs. And it was still a point that we point other new gaps at as, oh, look at this as an example of what where you can start. So I think this was really well done. Yeah, and I'd echo Flynn. I am most familiar with Envoy, and I know that this works reasonably well with Envoy, but I know that we've done some due diligence to ensure it can map to things like Nginx, AJ proxy, etc. So I feel reasonably good about this.
It looks
and
reasonable
hopefully
to me, yeah.
Yeah, and Grant, I would say hopefully, though not always, when we get to this stage of API, it should be relatively boring, hopefully, in the sense that we've already ideally had thorough review in the gap. And so when we get here, it's just copying the types that we agreed to in the gap over to API. And unless someone has second, oh, wow, I missed this, or, but hopefully not, then it should be uneventful. But yeah, I will echo what you said. I always appreciate more reviews on this. I think it looks like Candace and I are the only ones who've had a chance to review it so far. So if anyone else has cycles, more eyes are always better. People always catch things that I don't. So that's great. But yeah, hopefully this one's really close.
Just a quick question about that. Is session persistence already in V1? Because I'm seeing a couple of V1 session persistence references.
Yes, absolutely. That's a really
Oh.
fun thing about how we do versioning. It is in session persistence, but the way that you can do a little bit of sanity check when you're doing reviews is if you go all the way down and you look at the CRDs. So you can filter for YAML, which is fun. And you can say, oh, it's only changing experimental CRDs. And that is by design, right? So we basically augment whatever APIs exist with experimental fields or features. It's kind of like in upstream there are alpha feature gates, and they guard fields that happen to be on V1 APIs like service, for example, and we're kind of replicating that in maybe not the best way, but that's how we're doing it. So the thing that we care about is that we're not changing the standard channel CRDs in any way with this, and that is effective. So yeah, good question though.
Too bad I don't understand the answer.
Oh, so okay, so sorry, so that's
So
fine.
V1,
So
a V1 session persistence makes
So
sense in
what-
this?
so what that means is HTTP route is available exclusively in V1 now, right? So if you want to add any new field to that API, you need to do it to the API version it supports. And so what we're doing is we're saying you can install the experimental channel version of HTTP route, and if you do, you'll get session persistence fields. If you install the standard channel version of HTTP route, which most people will do, these fields will be invisible. They won't be accessible to them. But that's why I'm kind of pointing out that if you look at the CRDs, so that's config, CRD, whatever, the only ones that have changed in this PR are the experimental ones, and the standard ones are unchanged, and that's exactly what we want. If these fields were to migrate,
if we were changing
Go
the
ahead.
standard channel CRDs, you would see standard in the path and not experimental.
Yep.
And we do not want to be changing the standard ones in this one.
Yep. Yeah, it's not the most intuitive thing. I will be the first to say that Kubernetes versioning has many problems that I dislike. It has the unfortunate thing of making you think API versions are more than they are, but they are unfortunately not as useful as I wish they were. So we've added our own layering on top of that in the form of release channels, but even those have flaws. But yeah, this is basically look at this as an API with every single experimental feature gate on, and that's how you get experimental channel CRDs.
And this is because the session persistence is not a new resource, it's just a new field on HTTP root.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, exactly. That's a good clarification. Like if we were adding a new resource, then it would absolutely start with an alpha API version. But because we're adding a new field to an API that's already stable, we just have to hide it from the standard channel and only show it in experimental channel. And that's what this is doing.
Okay, thanks.
Cool.
Um,
Then I think, go ahead.
I will look at 2969 after this meeting. I want to reread it a little bit more carefully than I can in the meeting. Um, Grant, were you going, now that 2966 is allegedly unblocked, are you planning to update 2969 with the results of 2966?
Yeah, I'll
There are
do that
too many
as
numbers.
soon as this merge. Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome. Thank you. Cool. And the last one here is back in TLS policy. And this is, we want to drop back in. So this is a whole long versioning discussion that I've spent far too long talking with people about. But hopefully, no, I've enjoyed every part of that discussion, but I feel bad for wasting people's time on that discussion. I appreciate everyone who spent the time to discuss it with me, though. With that said, I think that the least painful thing we can do, the least bad option, is to drop Alpha 2 entirely from the release and just release Alpha 3. This goes back to something that Flynn said earlier. It's basically, it avoids any accidental surprises and pain, right? So it is still going to be a painful transition, but it will be impossible to start that painful transition by accident. You will have to, it's unavoidable. You'll see an error when you try and upgrade. Oh, what happened? And then you'll say, oh, you mean I have to go through this really painful breaking change, but you'll be able to schedule that and understand what's happening instead of accidentally and unexpectedly breaking you at some point. And that's, I think, the least bad option we have here.
Yeah. It's really, it is really appalling to go and dig deep into this and find out just how bad most of our options are in this.
I feel like I should quote that somewhere, and that
Feel
would apply in
free.
so many contexts too. Yeah.
You are talking to the guy who gave a talk at a Contrib Summit titled "Everything Was Awful." So
Yes. Fair point.
I
So
might have to
yeah,
reprise that talk and include this particular aspect in it.
it's just it's so painful.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm open to any other idea here, but barring any alternatives, I think we should just move forward with this one. I did get a chance to chat with Shane before he went away for a couple days, and then Nick reappeared very briefly from his vacation to check in, and he was also okay with this direction. So I think we're okay on that sense, but I do want to give other people some time to think about this, think if there's other ways. But yeah, with that, I think this has sat long enough. We've given people some time to digest it, and I think this is unfortunately the least bad of the options. So does that make sense to you, Candace?
Do I have to say?
No, no, it's fine. No, whatever. Yeah, just yeah, we can
I
talk
wish we
more.
weren't. I wish we weren't doing it
Yeah.
because it does. I just do feel like it jeopardizes the release that's already available. And back in TLS policy is a user facing object. It's not
Yeah.
a cluster admin object.
Yeah.
So any users that have already deployed it, I mean, I'm sure Contour said this is an experimental
Yeah.
object, but
Yeah.
I don't think that things normally change in this drastic a way for an experimental object in Gateway API.
I think
No,
there's
you're
actually, no, go ahead, Rob.
yeah, you're completely right that this is the first breaking change in years in Gateway API. I think there was one time where we removed something when it was still experimental, but this is the first and most significant breaking change we've done. That is really unfortunate. I do think we want to minimize breaking changes because they are very painful. I will be the first to say, as someone who's been on both sides of a breaking change. With that said, I think that if we never break things in experimental channel, we risk people assuming a higher sense of stability than we intend to provide with experimental channel. If we get to a point where we can never change things in experimental channel, then the bar to get into experimental channel becomes that much higher. And it really limits our velocity, I think. So I think we do need to have some flexibility to make breaking changes, even though they will be inherently painful. And I don't want to make these common, but I do want to, when they're helpful and necessary, I do want to have some flexibility to be able to do them. But
I think
Flynn,
I
I
would
cut you
actually
off.
phrase that. I think I would phrase that more strongly than you just did, right? Where we are already in a situation where we see people relying on experimental channel CRDs in the real world, and that is a very dangerous thing. So I'm actually very concerned about the the possibility of people deciding that experimental is actually stable. I think that is a very bad thing. I also think it's a very
Yeah.
bad thing to permit accidentally beginning the pain of a migration. And that is a reason why I like this. Well, maybe like is too strong a word, but that is the reason why I am supporting this way of doing it, where we can't accidentally start that kind of pain.
Yeah.
And one more thing that is a shame is that if we don't in some way respect the implementations that are already done, at least to some degree, it risks people putting them off farther and farther until after we've moved something from experimental to the next level, whatever it is, standard or whatever.
Yeah.
And because it's a catch-22, because moving something into provisional depends on the number of implementations that are available. So I think that we may also want to take a look at that workflow and
Yeah. No, I mean,
maybe.
you're completely right. I mean, it is really a fine line to thread here. I don't know that we found the right balance yet. I do fear that at some point we will run out of implementations that are brave enough to, support experimental channel features. But so far we've had some really, really great implementations that have been on the cutting edge that have enabled us to get feedback on experimental features before we get anything across the line. And one of the things that I think has helped with that is for anything to get across the line, we actually need implementations to support it while it's experimental. So, for implementations that really do want a feature, then there is some real motivation to support that feature while it's still experimental. But I don't know. This is a really tough problem. API versioning is very difficult, and Kubernetes API versioning itself has many, many flaws, and so does Gateway API versioning on top of that. Um, I you know I don't love making breaking changes at any point, but I think for the long-term success of the API, having consistent TLS terminology throughout is a valuable goal. And so that makes me think that it's worth making those changes at this point while usage is hopefully a smaller chunk of what will eventually come. Like I hope that in the future we'll have many thousands, hundreds of thousands, I don't know, many, many users of this API, and the pain at the beginning of it will be worthwhile in the end. But we'll see.
Yeah. Or,
But
we'll coerce the API machinery people into doing something different that makes this work better. And yeah.
yeah,
Or we'll
yeah,
get everybody to
that's
just use the dynamic client for everything, and then life will be easier, right?
perfect. I have in seriousness been trying to gather some of our pain points and share them with API machinery. These changes, these kinds of changes, especially to Kubernetes API machinery, are years long. And then,
Yeah.
even more years for us to be able to use them in Gateway API. But I do hope that at least in the long haul, these kinds of pain points will be smoothed over. There are some interesting changes coming in upstream that I think will eventually help us out. I'm not saying they're ever going to solve all of this, but I'm hopeful that it will
we
gradually
should
get
talk
less
about
painful.
that.
Yes, yes. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you a million times, Candace, for everything you've done to push this one forward. I know this particular change is a painful one, but I really do appreciate yeah, getting this one through, and I hope that the end result will be good for the API as a whole. Any other last comments, thoughts, whatever, before we move on? Yeah. Yeah, I think that yeah, and I wanted to call out or I think Candace, you may have added this, but that the Contour, I know we were aware that Envoy Gateway supported backend TLS policy, but it looks like Contour also has released support for backend TLS policy. So it'll be helpful to get some feedback from people on that side as well, just how disruptive this change will be for them. Cool.
But it's too late now anyway, so.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah. Okay, so with that, Dave, I think you added a few things about conformance tests. I think this is you, Dave, is my
Yeah,
guess.
it's my
Okay.
weekly thing.
Yes, no, thank you. There's approvals, so what's the actual,
Because I
this is
did,
the only root change?
yeah, that's why that needs the leads to do it.
Oh,
Otherwise,
okay, that's dumb.
the other one will,
I'm blindly relying on Arco and others that have approved this for conformance, and I think the Golang CI bit is very straightforward. So, yeah,
and there's the
I'll go
other
for
one that just needs, I think it's like a Go mod file change, and that's why it needs leads for it.
Oh, wow, that's a tiny change. Okay. And who's already approved this from the conformance side? Arco. And Lior added a question. Oh, I added a question. Okay, I'll come back to this one. Yeah, I guess Dave, if you have a second to respond to this, that would make me feel better. It's not a big deal. I can still approve, but that's just if it's feasible to get this one in. I think it would just result in slightly less flaky tests overall, which is always a good thing.
I think for that one, I would prefer to see it be flaky versus, because I think
Well, but the problem is you will not see every, like, at least the implementations I'm aware of are running this on, these conformance tests as pre-submits or regular, nightly runs, whatever it happens to be. And so you may not see the flakes in person because they're not running against the Gateway API repo. They're running against every Gateway API implementation separately. So it's more just trying to get out ahead of it. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how likely a flake is here. I just would rather get ahead of it so we don't end up distributing a potentially flaky test to, dozens of implementations. But yeah, I agree that it's
I'm
not
looking
that
for is
likely.
like other people to chime in whether like the test doesn't like work and cover it.
Yeah,
If
if
I'm
anyone
reading
else,
if I'm reading this test correctly, the only thing I'm really wondering about is sorry. So The way that test distribution is doing its math is the way that I have done this math for this kind of test in pretty much everything else I've worked with, rather than adding them up across multiple runs like Rob was suggesting. The only place I've really seen stuff like this flake was ultimately ended up being that the test wasn't doing a correct job of waiting for all the requests to be completed before it did all of the math. Not so much that one of them did a 40-60 split and then the next one did a 60-40 split. If you're asking for a 50-50 split and you've done a reasonable amount of requests, then you really should get pretty close to that for any given cohort of requests, right?
Yeah.
So we could talk about whether, we could talk about the tolerance and we could tweak that so that we don't see a lot of flakes. But I think I agree with the test methodology as it is, as opposed to
I'd
doing
rather
a cumulative total across all the runs. Did that make sense?
Yeah, like I would prefer to tweak the tolerance, and we do run the test now 10 times.
Yeah. And I mean, we might
So-
find that, 0.05 might just be too small, right? Or maybe we need to do more than 10 concurrent requests. But I would, oh no, sorry, it's 10 concurrent, 500 total. Yeah, I would be inclined to stick with that. And if we start seeing flakes, I would tune the tolerance rather than do anything different.
Yeah, so just to clarify, it's 500, so 10 batches of 500 requests. What, like 10 individual cohorts of 500 requests, and at least one of the first time one of them is within tolerance, we pass. Is that correct?
Each test distribution is done, you could say it's an isolated test. So it does 500 requests, 10 concurrently. And then it looks for 5% tolerance. If it fails, then it runs it again, and it runs it again 10 times.
Right. So the first time one
It'll
of
give it
them
up to 10
is
chances
within,
to pass.
Yeah.
the first time one of them is within tolerance, it passes and continues on.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't feel strongly about this enough about this to, I think it's reasonable.
For me though, it'd be curious to see, I don't know if it's like proprietary information that you have, to know like why the other, like I know I'm not a stats major to know if what you're suggesting is can you prove
No,
that works one way, or like is this method like it just kind of proves that even if you did your test, it's covered by my test. Like I don't know enough about like stats, and I don't know what what's it called? Like subsection of stats that covers this type of like
Yeah.
the set of distributions fall under this set. Like I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think this is reasonable enough. I was just, trying. I've spent far too long dealing with flaky tests in Kubernetes or on, internal things to see some very, very strange edge cases. And so I'm very paranoid. I think this was overly paranoid. I think this is reasonable enough. Yeah, if there are issues, we can revisit. Yeah. We're running out of time. Let me quickly go through. Oh, we need the response. Does anyone actually running response header modifier test on backend ref? Like, does anybody support this?
I think Istio might, because I was testing against Istio, but I know.
Yeah, I would defer. I'd love to actually see a test run of this pass. I hate to like make this a conformance test dependent on it passing with at least one implementation, but it just makes me feel a little bit better. Or we could add some concept of stability to conformance tests to say, we think this is correct, but we don't really know because we've never run it against anything.
Because for the
But
mirror one for backend ref. It's like if no one's running it, I still would like to see implementations have like a constant for advertising the feature. Do you know what I mean? Like it's,
Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah,
I think let me follow up with this one because we are quickly running out of time, and Candace has reminded me that we really need to talk about release timeline. And on that note, let me quickly run through the name route rules thing. I think we are too late on this one for 1.1. It's gap is merged, but we are struggling as much as it is to get the current scope of everything that we have agreed to out the door, and I am just not brave enough to try and increase that scope anymore. So I think that'll be the first thing that gets into 1.2, and hopefully we can get 1.2 out more quickly. But for now, I think 1.1 is just what we have up here. And on that note, for timeline, I am desperately trying to get SIGNet leads to sign off on an RC1, but to do that, I really need to have these last pieces in place. I think with this one, I think Flynn, you LGTM this one, so this one will be complete. Then these are complete. This is also LGTM'd and merging. That'll be complete. And so it's just the follow-ups that were dependent on this one getting updated. And so then we should be code complete, hopefully tomorrow, let's say. That's my best guess. And from there, I just turn it over to SIGNet leads. And as soon as they give us a sign, and to clarify, by SIGNet, I mean SIG Network technical leads in Kubernetes, and I want them to give us a sign off that it's okay to get to do RC1. I've discussed these ideas informally with a couple of them so far, but I do want to get some kind of formal sign off that we're good to proceed. As soon as that happens, we'll hit RC1, get it out the door, and then usually the time period between an RC1 and a final release is around 2 weeks. So if perchance we are lucky enough to get an RC1 out this week, then we're looking at end of April, early May for a final 1.1 release. But that all relies on everything coming together, on us actually getting everything code complete by tomorrow, let's say. Just these last couple of PRs in, and then actually getting the sign off from SIG Network technical leads this week as well. So yeah, does that make sense? Any questions or thoughts on that timeline?
So if
Cool.
we
Okay.
wanted, if we are going to do a V11 blog, it should start like this week
Yes, yes, exactly.
to give them 2 weeks, but we don't know until it's approved whether those features are going to make it in as they are specified.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything leaving experimental, I think, is pretty safe. And I would say I can't imagine any issue with the session persistence because that's already come up before back in TLI. Like a lot of these things, if anything, this was a bit contentious in the last time we brought this up. I think we've sat on it long enough, discussed it more. I think this one's going to be fine. Yeah, so I'm hopeful that this will all make it through. Obviously, in the past, if something has changed, it's just been cut. So if, worst case, we write up a blog post and then we say, oh, we need to remove the paragraph about X because it didn't make it into this release. And, that's annoying, but not the end of the world. So I would say, for anyone who has some time to help with a blog post, that's top of mind because, yeah, getting a draft in this week with a target 2 weeks out, it would certainly be ideal just so that we can get it on the radar and help SIGDocs folks understand that we have this coming down the pipeline. Yeah.
I will try to help with blog post stuff later this week.
Sweet.
Fingers crossed. There's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, no, understood. And I
Shocking,
think,
I know.
yeah, I think Candace is also, not to put you on the spot, but I think Candace, you've also said you'd be happy to help edit blog posts. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, cool.
We're
Great,
working
I'll
thank
just
on it.
go and we'll just feed it into ChatGPT and edit it
Perfect.
to taste, right?
You mean Gemini or no? Just- no. Yes.
I'll use
Yes.
Grok and see how bad
Oh,
it can be.
oh no.
No, actually,
Oh
I
man.
don't never ever
I
ask how
know.
bad Musk can be. You know?
Yeah. Um, One last thing, we're out of time for today's meeting, but I do want to call out some of these PRs. There's a couple that are just trying to squeeze in oh, actually, this is a huge one. Christine, I think I saw Christine on the call. This is awesome. Christine has done some really good work to actually display the results of all these conformance reports.
Woo!
And we actually
Oh,
have
nice.
yeah, isn't this cool?
Well, except for the
So I
fact that
think
Linkerd is not in there, but
I know. Oh, I'm getting kicked out, so I really do have to leave. But thank you, Christine. There are some others that to look for in triage, so please take a moment to look at the rest in that list and give them a review. But yeah, huge thanks to Christine for getting this one out there. Thanks, everyone.
thank you.